Wogan, however, was not immediately benefited by his discovery. He knew that if a single whisper of it reached the prince's ear, there would be at once an end to his small chances. The old man would take alarm, he might punish the offender, but he would none the less surely refuse his consent to Wogan's project. Wogan must keep his lips quite closed and let his antagonists do boldly what they would. And that they were active he found a way to discover. The Countess from this time plied him with kindness. He must play cards with her and Prince Constantine in the evening, he must take his coffee in her private apartments in the morning. So upon one of these occasions he spoke of his departure from Ola. "I shall go by way of Prague," and he stopped in confusion and corrected himself quickly. "At least, I am not sure. There are other ways into Italy." The Countess showed no more concern than she had shown over her harp string. She talked indifferently of other matters as though she had barely heard his remark, but she fell into the trap. Wogan was aware that the governor of Prague, page 54, was her kinsman, and that afternoon he left the castle alone, and taking the road to Vienna, turned as soon as he was out of sight and hurried round the town until he came out upon the road to Prague. He hid himself behind a hedge a mile from Ola, and had not waited half an hour before a man came riding by in hot haste. The man wore the Countess's livery of green and scarlet. Wogan decided not to travel by way of Prague, and returned to the castle content with his afternoon's work. He had indeed more reason to be content with it than he knew, for he happened to have remarked the servant's face as well as his livery, and so at a later time was able to recognize it again. He had no longer any doubt that a servant in the same livery was well upon his way to Vienna. The roads were bad, it was true, and the journey long, but Wogan had not the prince's consent, and could not tell when he would obtain it. The servant might return with the emperor's order for his arrest before he had obtained it. Wogan was powerless. He sent his list of names to Gaydon and Schlestadt, but that was the only precaution he could take. The days passed, Wogan spent them in unavailing persuasions, and New Year's Day came and found him still at Ola and in a great agitation and distress. Upon that morning, however, while he was dressing, there came a rap upon his door, and when he opened it he saw the prince's treasurer, a foppish gentleman, very dainty in his words. Page 55. "Mr. Warner," said the treasurer, "His Highness has hinted to me his desires, he has molded them into the shape of a prayer or a request." "In a word, he has bidden you," said Wogan. "Fie, sir. There's a barbarous and improper word, an ill-sounding word, upon my honor, a word without dignity or merit and banishable from polite speech. His Highness did most prettily entreat me with a fine gentleness of condescension befitting a Sunday or a New Year's Day to bring in present and communicate from hand to hand a gift, a most incomparable proper gift, the mirror and image of his most incomparable proper friendship." Wogan bowed, and requested the treasurer to enter and be seated the while he recovered his breath. "Nay, Mr. Warner, I must be concise, puritanical, and unadorned in my language as any rawhead or bloodybones. The cruel, irrevocable moments pass. I could consume an hour, sir, before I touched as I may say the hem of the reason of my coming." "Sir, I do not doubt it," said Wogan. "But I will not hinder you from forthwith immediately and at once incorporating with your most particular and inestimable treasures this jewel, this turquoise of heaven's own charming blue, encased and decorated with gold." The treasurer drew the turquoise from his pocket. It was of the size of an egg. He placed it in Wogan's hand, who gently returned it. Page 56. "I cannot take it," said he. "Gemini," cried the treasurer. "But it is more than a turquoise, Mr. Warner. Jewelers have delved in it. It has become subservient to man's necessities. It is a snuff-box. I cannot take it." King John of Poland, he whom the vulgar call Glorious John, did rescue and enlarge it from its slavery to the Grand Vizier of Turkey at the Great Battle of Vienna. There is no other in the world." Wogan cut the treasurer short. "You will take it again to His Highness. You will express to him my gratitude for his kindness, and you will say furthermore these words: Mr. Warner cannot carry back into Italy a present for himself and a refusal for his prince." Wogan spoke with so much dignity that the treasurer had no words to answer him. He stood utterly bewildered. He stared at the jewel. "Here is a quandary," he exclaimed. "I do declare every circumstance of me trembles," and shaking his head he went away. But in a little he came again. "His Highness distinguishes you, Mr. Warner, with imperishable honors. His Highness solicits your company to a solitary dinner. You shall dine with him alone. His presence and unfettered conversation shall season your soup and be the condiments of your meat." Wogan's heart jumped. There could be only one, page 57, reason for so unusual an invitation on such a day, and he was not mistaken, for as soon as the prince was served in a little room, he dismissed the lackeys and presented again the turquoise snuff-box with his own hands. "See, Mr. Wogan, your persuasions and your conduct have gained me over," said he. "Your refusal of this bagatelle assures me of your honor. I trust myself entirely to your discretion. I confide my beloved daughter to your care. Take from my hands the gift you refused this morning, and be assured that no prince ever gave to any man such full powers as I will give to you tonight." Wogan's gratitude well nigh overcame him. The thing that he had worked for and almost despaired of had come to pass. For a while he could not speak. He flung himself upon his knees and kissed the prince's hand. That very night he received the letter giving him full powers, and the next morning he drove off in a carriage of His Highness drawn by 6 Polish horses towards the town of Stralin on the road to Prague. At Stralin he stayed a day, feigning a malady, and sent the carriage back. The following day, however, he took horse, and riding along by roads and lanes avoided Prague and hurried towards Schlestadt. He rode watchfully, avoiding towns, and with an eye alert for every passer-by. That he was ahead of any courier from the Emperor at Vienna he did not doubt, but, on the other hand, the Countess of Berg and Lady Featherstone had the advantage of, page 58, him by some 4 days. There would be no lack of money to hinder him, there would be no scruple as to the means. Wogan remembered the moment in his bedroom when he had seen the dagger bright in the moon's rays. If he could not be arrested, there were other ways to stop him. Accidents may happen to any man. However, he rode unhindered with the prince's commission safe against his breast. He felt the paper 100 times a day to make sure that it was not stolen nor lost, nor reduced to powder by a miracle. Day by day his fears diminished, since day by day he drew a day's journey nearer to Schlestadt. The paper became a talisman in his thoughts, a thing endowed with magic properties to make him invisible like the cloak or cap of the fairy tales. Those few lines in writing not a week back had seemed an unattainable prize, yet he had them, and so now they promised him that other unattainable thing, the enlargement of the princess. It was in his nature, too, to grow buoyant in proportion to the difficulties of his task. He rode forward, therefore, with a good heart, and one somber evening of rain came to a village some miles beyond Augsburg. The village was a straggling half-mile of low cottages, lost as it were on the level of a wide plain. Across this plain, bare but for a few lines of poplars and stunted willow trees, Wogan had ridden all the afternoon, and so little did the thatched cottages break the monotony of the plain's appearance, that, page 59, though he had had the village within his vision all that while, he came upon it unawares. The dusk was gathering, and already through the tiny windows the meager lights gleamed upon the road and gave to the falling raindrops the look of steel beads. 4 days would now bring Wogan to Schlestadt. The road was bad and full of holes. He determined to go no farther that night if he could find a lodging in the village, and coming upon a man who stood in his path he stopped his horse. "Is there an inn where a traveler may sleep?" he asked. "Assuredly," replied the man, "and find forage for his horse." "The last house, but I will myself show your honor the way." "There is no need, my friend, that you should take a colic," said Wogan. "I shall earn enough drink to correct the colic," said the man. He had a sack over his head and shoulders to protect him from the rain, and stepped out in front of Wogan's horse. They came to the end of the street and passed on into the open darkness. About 20 yards farther a house stood by itself at the roadside, but there were only lights in one or two of the upper windows, and it held out no promise of hospitality. In front of it, however, the man stopped. He opened the door and helloed into the passage. Wogan stopped too, and above his head something creaked and groaned like a gibbet in the wind. He looked up and saw a signboard glimmering in the dusk with a new coat, page 60, of white paint. He had undoubtedly come to the inn, and he dismounted. The landlord advanced at that moment to the door. "My man," said he, "will take your horse to the stable," and the fellow who had guided Wogan led the horse off. "Oh, is he your man?" said Wogan. "Ah." And he followed the landlord into the house. It was not only the signboard which had been newly painted, for in the narrow passage the landlord stopped Wogan. "Have a care, sir," said he, "the walls are wet. It will be best if you stand still while I go forward and bring a light." He went forward in the dark and opened a door at the end of the passage. A glow of ruddy light came through the doorway, and Wogan caught a glimpse of a brick-floored kitchen and a great open chimney and one or two men on a bench before the fire. Then the door was again closed. The closing of the door seemed to Wogan a churlish act. "The hospitality," said he to himself, "which plants a man in the road so that a traveler on a rainy night may not miss his bed should at least leave the kitchen door open. Why should I stay here in the dark?" Wogan went forward, and from the careful way in which he walked, a way so careful and stealthy indeed that his footsteps made no sound, it might have been inferred that he believed the page 61 floor to be newly painted too. He had, at all events, no such scruples about the kitchen door, for he seized the handle and flung it open quickly. He was met at once by a cold draught of wind. A door opposite and giving onto a yard at the back had been opened at precisely the same moment, and as Wogan stepped quickly in at his door a man stepped quickly out by the door opposite and was lost in the darkness. "What? Are you going?" the landlord cried after him as he turned from the fire at which he was lighting a candle. "Wilhelm has a wife and needs must," at once said a woman who was reaching down some plates from a dresser. The landlord turned towards the passage and saw Wogan in the doorway. "You found your way, sir," said he, looking at Wogan anxiously. "Nor are your walls any poorer of paint on that account," said Wogan as he took his wet cloak and flung it over a chair. The landlord blew out his candle and busied himself about laying the table. A great iron pot swung over the fire by a chain, and the lid danced on the top and allowed a savory odor to escape. Wogan sat himself down before the fire and his clothes began to steam. "You laugh at my paint, sir," said the landlord. He was a fat, good-humored-looking man, communicative in his manner as a Boniface should be, page 62, and his wife was his very complement. "You laugh at my paint, but it is, after all, a very important thing. What is a great lady without her rouge-pot, when you come to think of it? It is the same with an inn. It must wear paint if it is to attract attention and make a profit." "There is philosophy in the comparison," said Wogan. "Sir, an innkeeper cannot fail of philosophy if he has his eyes and a spark of intelligence. The man who took refuge in a tub because the follies of his fellows so angered him was the greatest fool of them all. He should have kept an inn on the road to Athens, for then the follies would have put money into his pocket and made him laugh instead of growl." His wife came over to the fireplace and lifted the lid of the pot. "The supper is ready," said she. "And perhaps, sir, while you are eating it you can think of a name for my inn." "Why, it has a signboard already," said Wogan, "and a name, too, I suppose." "It has a signboard, but without a device," said the landlord, and while Wogan drew a chair to the table he explained his predicament. "There is another inn 5 miles along the road, and travelers prefer to make their halt there. They will not stop here. My father, sir, set it all down to paint. It was his dream, sir, to paint the house from floor to ceiling. His last words bade, page 63, me pinch and save until I could paint. Well, here is the house painted, and I am anxious for a new device and name which shall obliterate the memory of the other. The Black Eagle is its old name. Ask any traveler familiar with the road between Augsburg and Schlestadt, and he will counsel you to avoid the Black Eagle. You are traveling to Schlestadt, perhaps." Wogan had started ever so slightly. "To Strasbourg," he said, and thereafter ate his supper in silence, taking count with himself. "My friend," so his thoughts ran, "the sooner you reach Schlestadt the better. Here are you bleating like a sheep at a mere chance mention of your destination. You have lived too close with this fine scheme of yours. You need your friends." Wogan began to be conscious of an unfamiliar sense of loneliness. It grew upon him that evening while he sat at the table. It accompanied him up the stairs to bed. Other men of his age were now seated comfortably by their own hearths, while he was hurrying about Europe, a vagabond adventurer, risking his life for, and at once the reason why he was risking his life rose up to convict him a grumbler. The landlord led him into a room in the front of the house which held a great canopied bed and little other furniture. There was not even a curtain to the window. Wogan raised his candle and surveyed the dingy walls. "You have not spent much of your new paint on your guest room, my friend?"